Hey guys, I'm Alex. Tonight, we're diving into something quietly powerful, the strange, often unwelcome companion of loneliness, and how it might actually be one of your greatest teachers in Stoic practice. Welcome to Stillness and Strength channel, my quiet little corner of the internet where we breathe, reflect, and return to what truly matters. The world may not be yours to control, but your mind, that's your kingdom. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing who's on the other side of this quiet night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You didn't plan for it, that quiet moment that lingers just a little too long. Maybe someone canceled. Maybe no one replied. Maybe you're just alone. Again, you sit in the stillness. The room isn't unfamiliar, but the silence feels louder than usual tonight. There's a strange echo, not from the walls, but from inside you. It's a kind of presence wrapped in absence. At first, your mind resists. You scroll. You fidget. You adjust your position like that will rearrange the emptiness around you. But it doesn't. The silence stays. The loneliness settles like dust in sunlight. And then, maybe not in words but in sensation, something shifts. You begin to realize this silence isn't empty. It's full of the things you've been avoiding. Thoughts, regrets, longings, fears, they've all been patiently waiting for you to stop running. And now they sit with you, cross-legged and uninvited but strangely calm. They're not here to hurt you. They're here to be seen. The Stoics taught that what disturbs us is not events themselves, but our judgments about them. Loneliness is no exception. What if it isn't a punishment, but a pause? Not an exile, but an invitation. Epictetus reminds us, if you are ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity. That hunger for others to fill the room, could it be an escape from meeting your truest self? The room isn't empty. It's just finally undistracted. And now you are here with no one to perform for, no one to impress, no noise to drown in. Just you, and that's not nothing. That's the beginning of something. You begin to hear your breathing, slow and rhythmic. Your thoughts unfold in long, unbroken lines. Without the chaos of company or the clutter of conversation, you meet the original version of yourself. The one before the roles, the obligations, the masks. And it's awkward. Of course it is. Because who teaches us how to sit in our own presence? Who celebrates solitude? Who equips us to befriend the very state that most people flee? But maybe in this moment, loneliness isn't a curse. Maybe it's a kind of honest mirror, one that doesn't flatter you but also doesn't lie. You remember Marcus Aurelius, writing in the night, surrounded by generals and senators, and yet scribbling about returning to the self. He ruled an empire, yet sought a kingdom within. Loneliness visited even emperors, but it didn't defeat them. It refined them. And maybe, just maybe, it's here to refine you too. There's a small object near you, a cup, a lamp, the corner of a blanket. You notice it for the first time tonight. Not because it's new, but because your eyes are no longer looking past everything in search of something else. The Stoics would call this attention to the present, the training ground for tranquility. The loneliness you're feeling, it's not an enemy, it's an environment, and like any environment, it can shape you if you allow it. But here's the deeper question. Are you willing to listen? Not just to the silence, but to what the silence makes audible. You don't have to answer tonight. This isn't an interrogation, it's an opening. A door has quietly creaked open. You didn't ask for it, but it's here. And now the only question is, will you walk through? Somewhere inside you, a whisper forms, not in words, but in understanding. I am not my loneliness, but I can learn from it. And just like that, the night feels a little softer. Not brighter, not louder, just gentler. Like it's no longer trying to fight you. You close your eyes for a moment. The silence doesn't press anymore. It holds. And for the first time in a long while, being alone doesn't feel like being abandoned. It feels like being returned to a part of yourself that had been waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to arrive. You wake the next morning, or maybe you never fully slept. The light seeps in through the blinds like a quiet reminder. The world has resumed. People are moving. Notifications return. Noise reclaims the room. But something's changed, hasn't it? You feel it like the echo of a distant bell, not loud but resonant. The way last night held you. The way you didn't fall apart in the silence. That means something. You remember what the Stoics taught. You don't control the world's movements, only your response to them. And last night you responded with presence. You didn't run, you stayed, you breathed. That matters more than you think. Still, as you step back into the flow of daily life, the quiet slips away quickly. There's a kind of magnetism to the world, to messages, headlines, tasks, noise. It's so easy to forget the stillness you tasted just hours ago. Because now you're back in the realm where people expect things from you. Responses, smiles, roles. But here's what the loneliness taught you. Your worth isn't measured by how many people need you. It's revealed by how calmly you can stand when no one does. And sometimes the world does withdraw. The text doesn't come. The meeting is canceled. The house feels too large for one body. And that ancient ache returns, the one that whispers, "You're forgotten." But you pause. You remember, this is not personal. This is not punishment. This is space. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And isn't it true? Most of the pain of loneliness isn't in the aloneness itself. It's in the story we attach to it. The fear that we are unloved, unworthy, left behind. But fear is not fact. And tonight, you begin to test that truth. You imagine a version of yourself walking through a forest. No one is around. The trees don't speak. The wind doesn't applaud. And yet you're still you. You still breathe. You still matter. Is your value truly dependent on being seen? What if the absence of others is not evidence of your emptiness, but of your capacity? Because it takes capacity to be alone and not collapse. It takes inner scaffolding. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, that part of you that holds, even when the world does not. And in the moments when the world pulls away, when plans fall through, when friends drift, when the room is just a little too quiet, that citadel doesn't crumble. It whispers instead. This is your time. Use it. You open a book. You light a candle. You sit not to distract but to deepen. You do something rare in this world. You learn to live in your own company, not as a backup plan, not as a last resort, but as an act of strength. Because, as Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And isn't company one of those things? You can't control who shows up, but you can control who you are when no one does. And the longer you stay with that idea, the less the silence frightens you. In fact, it begins to feel full. You start to notice things. The way the fabric of your shirt feels against your skin. The shift of light on the floor. The way your own thoughts move gently, slowly, like leaves on water. The world may have withdrawn, but you have arrived, fully, in this moment, in yourself. And this leads to a quiet paradox, one the Stoics often hinted at. Only by being alone do we realize we are never truly alone. Because what remains when the noise fades is awareness. And awareness, that gentle, patient flame inside you, is enough. Stillness is not emptiness. It's a different kind of fullness, one that doesn't demand, one that simply is. So now when the world steps back, you don't chase after it, you bow. You nod, you say, "Thank you for the space." And you turn inward, toward the only presence that never leaves, your own. Here's something to reflect on before the next section. If you were to stop trying to fill every silence, what might finally rise to the surface? Night falls again, but this time you don't dread it. The quiet comes not as an intruder but as a guest. You've made a little more space for it now. The air feels different when you stop fighting it. Like a conversation you don't have to rush, like a presence that deepens in stillness. You sit again, maybe on the edge of your bed, maybe on the floor. The hum of the world is fainter now and your thoughts begin to gather. This is when the real dialogue begins, not with anyone outside you, but with the void, the space between distractions, the silence between words, the moment after a breath and before the next one begins. At first, it feels like nothing, but then it speaks not in sentences but in sensations. A memory rises. You're not sure where it came from. Maybe childhood, maybe last week, a look, a silence, a goodbye, and your instinct is to turn away, to move, to fix, to find anything else. But you remember what the Stoics practiced: face everything, not with aggression, not with panic, but with presence. And so you stay. This moment, this quiet encounter with the unseen parts of yourself, this is the practice. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, don't waste the rest of your time here worrying about other people unless it affects the common good. And right now, what others think or don't think fades into irrelevance. Because this space, this quiet room, this silent night is sacred. It's here that you begin to speak with the parts of you you've kept buried under productivity, praise, and other people's expectations. And those parts don't scream. They don't demand, they whisper, I'm tired. I'm afraid. I miss who I used to be. And you don't rush to solve them. You don't drown them out. You listen, that's all. And in listening, something ancient happens. You begin to feel whole again, not because you're fixed, but because you're seen, even if only by yourself. This, too, is Stoicism, not the cold armor people mistake it for, but the warm clarity that comes from sitting honestly with what is. The void is no longer a threat, it's a canvas, and what you place upon it is up to you. Maybe tonight you write something, not for others, not for approval, just for you. A sentence, a phrase, a breath written down, or maybe you light a single candle, just to remind yourself that even the smallest light holds meaning in darkness. The Stoics weren't afraid of the void because they weren't afraid of themselves. They practiced letting go of control, of comfort, of certainty. And when they did, what remained was truth, not in grand declarations, but in small, honest moments. Like this one, you sit, alone, fully here. And for the first time, you don't need to escape. The quiet is your teacher now. And its lesson is subtle but profound. You are not the noise you create. You are the awareness that remains when the noise fades. So now, before the next scroll, the next distraction, the next attempt to fill the void, pause. Ask yourself this: what if the void isn't here to swallow you, but to return you to yourself? There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after a few nights alone. Not the sharpness of adrenaline, but the gentle unfolding of layers you didn't know you were carrying. You sit again, and this time there's less resistance, less need to reach for your phone, less twitching toward distraction. You're starting to hear the contours of your own thoughts, and they aren't always kind. That's okay. Loneliness doesn't just reveal your silence, it reveals your self-talk. The inner voices that have gone unexamined because the world was too loud to hear them. And now, they speak clearly. Why haven't you done more? Why aren't you more like them? Will anyone ever truly understand you? You listen and you want to push back. To fix, to argue, to silence them with logic. But what if instead you simply observed? The Stoics weren't strangers to harsh inner dialogue. They trained not to eliminate it but to see it without becoming it. Epictetus taught, it's not things that upset us, but our opinions about them. And some of your opinions have grown wild in the dark. You begin to notice the storylines you've been telling yourself for years about being unworthy, or too much, or not enough. But tonight, in the absence of performance, you see those stories for what they are: mental habits, not facts. And slowly, like an overgrown garden, you begin to clear a little space. Not by force, but by truth. You remind yourself, gently, that you've survived every lonely night so far, that the stories you tell yourself can be rewritten. That awareness is the first freedom. The quiet becomes a kind of mirror again, not the one in your bathroom, lit and flattering, but the one deep within, where no image is projected, only presence is reflected. And in that presence, you begin to sense something deeper beneath the stories. Stillness. Not silence from outside, but silence within. And that silence isn't empty. It's anchoring, like the ocean floor beneath the waves. You realize loneliness isn't just about being without others. It's about being with everything you've never wanted to feel. And when you finally allow yourself to feel it, the sorrow, the envy, the grief, the longing, something begins to loosen. You're not drowning, you're decompressing. There's no one here to judge your pace. So you go slow. You notice your breath again, not as a technique, but as a companion. It's been with you through every chapter. It never left. Like a quiet Stoic mentor, always there, even when unacknowledged. You inhale, I'm here. You exhale, I'm okay. You inhale, this is real. You exhale, I can stay. You begin to understand something the Stoics hinted at, often between their lines. The real freedom isn't in having company. It's in not needing it. Not in a cruel, dismissive way, but in a grounded, peaceful one. You start to see loneliness not as an enemy, but as a doorway. And when you stop trying to force that door open, when you simply sit by it, you realize it opens inward. So the question becomes, can you walk through that door not to find someone else, but to finally meet yourself? Tonight, the air feels heavier, not oppressive, just fuller somehow. You've begun to notice these subtle shifts. The way your own body responds to stillness. The way your thoughts stretch out when there's no conversation, no sound, no feedback from another face. You're growing more fluent in the language of solitude, and it surprises you. Some nights you even prefer it. But then there are moments when something inside you recoils. You crave a voice, a hand, a message. You open your phone, then close it. Open again, scroll, pause, nothing satisfies, nothing sticks. And in that space the ache returns. The Stoics would not have scolded you for that. They would have simply nodded, maybe said something like, "You expected the world to behave differently, and when it didn't, you suffered. This isn't a failure. It's a fact. You were born into a body wired for connection, to seek tribe, to interpret silence as danger. You are not broken because you feel this longing. But here's the shift the Stoics offer. What if you can feel the longing without becoming lost in it? You pause again. You imagine yourself not as the one abandoned, but as the one being called back to the self. Like a traveler who's wandered far and wide, searching, only to find that the treasure was buried quietly at home all along. The Greeks had a word, autarkeia, self-sufficiency, but it wasn't cold isolation. It was rooted, radiant independence, a knowing that you are already whole. That doesn't mean you won't want connection. It means your peace doesn't depend on it. And as you reflect, you start to see how often you've bartered your inner calm for scraps of attention. You've checked your phone instead of checking in with yourself. You've waited for the right words from someone else instead of speaking gently to your own heart. But now, something is shifting. You begin to speak to yourself, not in the voice of judgment but of clarity. This is hard. I miss them, but I am here, still standing. That's not weakness. That's inner strength, the very core of Stoic practice, because the Stoics knew. Your emotions are not enemies. They're weather patterns. They come, they go. They do not define the sky, so you let the ache be. You don't try to erase it. You don't make it into a grand story. You just let it breathe. And beneath that ache, there's something older, quieter, a voice without panic, a presence without demand. It says, "You've always been more than the attention you receive. You've always been more than the relationships that held you. And even if no one sees you right now, you can see yourself." This moment is not about abandonment. It's about realignment. The more you sit in the silence, the more you begin to remember your own value, not because someone told you, but because you're starting to feel it. And that's the paradox of this night. The more you accept your aloneness, the less alone you feel. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't erase the need for community, but it shifts the center of gravity back to where it belongs, inside, within the walls of your own presence. And so you ask, if no one texted back, would you still be worthy? If no one knocked on your door tonight, would your breath still count? If the world grew silent, would you still hum with life? You already know the answer. You just forgot for a while. Tonight in the quiet you remember. The wind taps gently against the window. Outside the world continues its noise, cars hum, lights flicker, lives carry on. But in here, in this little space you've carved out, there's only you and your thoughts. And something is changing. Loneliness, once a weight, has become a kind of presence. Still unfamiliar, still strange, but less hostile, less sharp. You realize now it was never trying to hurt you. It was trying to get your attention. You're beginning to understand what the Stoics meant when they said that pain is a signal, not a punishment. You sit longer tonight, not because you must, but because it feels necessary, like brushing the dust off something sacred. Your mind wanders as minds do. It floats to memories, to old conversations, to people who used to be anchors but are now echoes. And then it settles gently on something else, expectation. You feel it like a knot in your chest. All the things you thought life would be by now. All the ways you assumed people should behave, love should feel, success should unfold. And when those expectations cracked under the pressure of reality, you were left staring into a void. But tonight, in this soft space of honesty, you're ready to ask, what if the pain isn't from being alone, but from fighting what is? The Stoics talked often about the art of letting go, not out of resignation, but out of respect for nature. Don't seek for things to happen as you wish, Epictetus wrote, but wish for things to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly. That sounds simple, but to let go of expectation, to really let go, requires a kind of courage that most people avoid their whole lives. Because it means releasing your grip on the fantasy of how someone would love you, the fantasy of where you'd be by now, the fantasy that pain, if avoided long enough, might never knock, but it knocked anyway. And here you are, still breathing, still steady, still willing to look it in the eye. That alone makes you rare. You reflect now on what's changed since the first night. It's subtle, but you feel it. A softening, a steadiness, a shift from panic to presence. The loneliness is still there, yes, but now it feels less like a curse and more like a companion. A difficult one, perhaps, but one who tells the truth. And in that truth, you see clearly, your expectations were never guarantees. They were guesses, hopes, projections built on shaky ground. But reality, raw and silent as it is, has never lied to you. It simply is. And the Stoic strength comes not from bending reality to your will, but from standing steady in the face of it. You let out a breath, a slow, grounded breath. And maybe, for the first time in days or weeks, your shoulders drop a little. You feel the gravity of the moment. You feel the weight of everything you've been carrying, all the hopes and shoulds and stories, and you begin to set them down. Not forever, just for now, just enough to see who you are without them, and who you are is enough, more than enough. You don't need someone else to say it tonight. You don't need a mirror to confirm it. You feel it in your stillness. You feel it in the peace that follows surrender. So now you ask yourself, if you let go of how it was supposed to be, what might open up instead? It's a quieter kind of night now. Not silent exactly, but settled. The kind of quiet that doesn't just come from the absence of sound, but from the absence of resistance. You aren't fighting the moment anymore. You aren't bargaining with the silence or bracing against it. You're just here, present. And that might be the most radical thing you've done all week. There's a subtle shift in your breathing. You've noticed that too. It deepens without effort, not forced, not measured, just natural. As if your body is finally safe enough to release its grip. Tonight, you remember something. You are not your past reactions. That version of you, the one who feared the silence, who checked their phone every 5 minutes, who filled time to avoid thought, that was a version shaped by survival. But survival isn't your only mode anymore. You're learning to live, to sit with what is, to see what is. And in doing so, you meet something deeper, the part of you that cannot be shaken. Call it your essence, your center, your soul. The Stoics called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the core of reason and will, the part untouched by circumstance. It doesn't rise or fall with praise. It doesn't flinch at solitude. It doesn't beg to be seen because it is seeing. And for a long time you ignored it because the world taught you to look outward, to perform, to please, to seek validation like oxygen. But here, now, with no one watching, you begin to reconnect. You feel how little you actually need. Not because you're shrinking your desires, but because you're rediscovering sufficiency. It's not the same as settling. It's knowing that right here, right now, you have everything you need to be okay. And that's power. Not loud, chest-thumping power, but rooted, sovereign, unshakable power. Tonight, maybe you light a candle again. Or you simply sit in the dark, listening to the soft hum of life around you, the fridge clicking, the faint wind brushing branches, the breath in your chest. It's all here. Always has been. You're just seeing it now. And this seeing, this quiet attention, is the essence of Stoic practice, because it's not about controlling emotions. It's about not being controlled by them. It's not about erasing fear. It's about not worshiping it. It's not about perfect peace. It's about present presence. And loneliness, when you truly sit with it, shows you where you've given your power away. You gave it to people who couldn't stay. You gave it to futures that didn't arrive. You gave it to stories that told you you were only lovable when wanted. But now, in the soft stillness of night, you begin to reclaim it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but breath by breath. And with each breath you remember. You are allowed to need no one. You are allowed to want deeply and still be full within. You are allowed to feel the ache and not let it define you. And so tonight, you don't reach for someone to fix it. You don't numb it with noise. You simply ask, if this moment, this breath, this body, this quiet were all I had, would it be enough? And slowly the answer begins to echo in the silence. Yes, yes, it would. The stillness feels familiar now. What used to feel like emptiness has softened into a kind of intimacy, not with another person, but with your own being. You sit longer before reaching for anything. The silence no longer threatens. It almost welcomes. And somewhere in this silence, a thought arises, quiet but insistent. You've spent so much of your life trying to be seen. By family, by lovers, by strangers on glowing screens. You shaped yourself like clay, softening this edge, amplifying that trait, all in service of being accepted, of being validated, of being known. But here's the truth that solitude begins to whisper. You cannot be truly seen by others until you've truly seen yourself. And you're starting to see yourself now, not the version you curated for approval, but the raw, unfiltered, unadorned presence beneath it all. The Stoics understood this craving to be recognized. It's deeply human, but they also warned against building your life on it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Ambition means tying your well-being to what other people say or do. Sanity means tying it to your own actions." That hits differently when you're alone, because there's no applause here, no social mirror, just your choices, just your thoughts, just your breath. And that can feel terrifying at first until it becomes liberating, because suddenly you're no longer performing, you're just existing. And for the first time, maybe that feels like enough. You think back to moments when you twisted yourself to fit someone's idea of worthy, times when silence scared you into speaking, when distance made you chase, when loneliness made you settle. But not tonight. Tonight you sit, you feel, you witness, and in doing so you reclaim a piece of yourself. You realize, the one who watches your thoughts, that's the real you. The one who notices the ache, that's the real you. The one who chooses presence over panic, that's the real you. You're not the roles, not the relationships, not the history. You're something steadier than all of that. And as this truth settles, another paradox reveals itself. The more you detach from needing to be seen, the more clearly you begin to see others. Without projection, without expectation. You begin to notice the person at the cafe who looked lost in thought, not as a potential source of validation, but as a fellow soul walking their own silent road. You begin to appreciate people not for how they make you feel, but for who they are when no one's watching. This is empathy born not of need, but of clarity. And that's where loneliness becomes a teacher again. Not a cruel one, but a wise one. Because in taking you away from the crowd, it brings you back to yourself. And from there, all real connection must begin. So now you ask, as the night deepens, if no one ever clapped again, would you still dance? If no one ever reassured you again, would you still speak truth? If no one ever watched, would you still live in integrity? You already know the answer, and tonight you begin to trust it. You wake in the middle of the night, not startled, not restless, just aware. The room is dim, shapes softened by the dark. No sudden thoughts, no spike of anxiety, just quiet awareness. And you realize something. This too is a form of presence. No agenda, no drama, just the simple act of being awake with yourself. So you don't reach for your phone, you don't try to force sleep. You just lie there breathing, letting the stillness cradle you. And in that stillness, another truth begins to surface. Loneliness isn't always a lack. Sometimes it's a lens. It sharpens what matters. It strips away noise. It reveals the parts of you that only emerge in the absence of distraction. You think of how often people fill their lives to avoid this very moment. The 3 a.m. clarity, the unscheduled silence, the breath that reveals what the day had buried. But now that you're here, you see its value. This is the mirror most people avoid. This is where the Stoics practice their deepest work, in quiet reflection, away from noise, away from comfort. Seneca often wrote letters in solitude, not because he was lonely, but because solitude gave him clarity. He said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And in this moment, you feel that. You feel how often the fear of being alone was louder than the reality of it. Because the reality, right now, it's calm, it's still, it's even peaceful. And you see now that peace isn't something the world grants. It's something you access when you stop clinging, when you stop running, when you simply let yourself be. So you lie there and you begin to count the things you haven't needed tonight. You haven't needed a reply to your message. You haven't needed someone to fill the room. You haven't needed external proof of your worth. That's not detachment. That's growth. Because for the first time, you're not demanding from the world what only your soul can provide. And this moment of still, conscious presence becomes a kind of prayer, not to a deity, not to an ideal, but to the deeper part of you that has always been waiting for you to return. You say softly, silently, "I'm here. I see you. We're okay." That's all, that's enough. And then you remember something Marcus Aurelius wrote in the quiet of his own nights. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Loneliness once felt like a wall, but now it feels like a threshold, a place you pass through, a place that invites you to strip off everything false, everything performative, everything that was never truly yours. You are not who others need you to be. You are not your output. You are not your profile. You are this being, this breath, this moment. And suddenly, the question isn't how do I fix my loneliness? It's, what is my loneliness showing me that nothing else could? There's a rhythm to this now. Each evening folds into the next like the soft turning of pages in a book you didn't know you were writing. A story told not in chapters, but in breath, in silence, in returning to yourself. And somewhere in the quiet, you notice. You're not just enduring your solitude anymore. You're inhabiting it. You walk slower. You listen longer. You speak more honestly, even if only to yourself. And that's not because you've stopped feeling the ache. The ache still visits. But now it's not an enemy. It's more like a signal, a soft bell that rings, reminding you to return to your center, to remember who you are without the noise. You begin to sense the difference between two kinds of solitude, the kind that is chosen and the kind that is imposed. At first, yours felt like the latter. Loneliness arrived uninvited, people left, circumstances shifted, and suddenly you were alone in a room with yourself. But now, you've stopped treating that room like a punishment. You've made it a sanctuary, not by adding more but by subtracting what wasn't real. And here, in this sanctuary of quiet, a deeper question stirs. What if solitude is not a void, but a teacher disguised as absence? The Stoics believe that the deepest kind of wisdom only arises when external distractions fall away. That's why they train themselves, not just in ideas, but in practice. Sleeping on the floor to remember what's essential, wearing simple clothes to avoid vanity, writing at dawn to face their minds before the day could muddy them. It wasn't for show, it was a way of saying, "I will not outsource my peace." You feel the truth of that now. There is a kind of power in knowing that your joy is not dependent on anyone checking in. that your self-respect is not built on anyone's recognition, that your peace doesn't need permission. You're learning to meet yourself fully, not just the calm parts but the chaotic ones too. You sit with your own restlessness. You hold space for your own longing, and in doing so you become less reactive, less desperate, less driven by fear. Because when you learn to sit with your own storms, no one else's weather can unseat you. You're not chasing distractions now. You're choosing presence, and presence changes everything. It changes how you speak to others with more clarity, less attachment. It changes how you face problems with more acceptance, less panic. It changes how you see time, not as something to kill, but as something to cherish. This is the fruit of solitude that is no longer resisted. And so you sit here tonight, candle flickering, fan humming softly in the corner, and you ask yourself again, what parts of you are finally being heard now that everything else has gone quiet? And in that question you find your answer, not in words, not even in thought, but in the stillness that no longer needs filling. You didn't notice it at first, but something subtle has shifted. You no longer tense at the sound of nothing. The quiet no longer carries the weight of absence. It carries presence, yours. You've stopped reaching for noise, stopped reaching for company that doesn't nourish. You've become your own source of steadiness. And it's not because you've become cold or withdrawn. It's because you've begun to understand a deeper kind of companionship, the kind that starts from within. There's something strange, almost paradoxical, about the way Stoicism treats loneliness. The Stoics didn't pretend it didn't exist. They just refused to be ruled by it. They knew the difference between being alone and feeling incomplete. And now you do too. You used to think loneliness meant something was wrong, that it had to be solved, that its presence meant failure socially, emotionally, spiritually. But now you see it differently. You see loneliness not as a judgment on your worth, but as a reflection of your depth. Because here's the truth you've been slowly uncovering. Not everyone can meet you where you are. And that's not arrogance. That's discernment. You've walked through fire. You've sat with your pain. You've practiced self-honesty on the nights when no one else showed up. You're not looking for someone to fix you anymore. You're looking for someone who recognizes you because they've walked their own quiet path too. Until then, you are not waiting. You are living. You are tending to your life quietly, faithfully, moment by moment. And the irony is, the more you stop chasing connection from a place of need, the more authentic connections begin to emerge. Not because you broadcast your wholeness, but because wholeness has a frequency of its own. It doesn't beg. It doesn't perform. It simply resonates. And people who have cultivated that same steadiness, they feel it, they recognize it. And those are the people worth sharing silence with. So tonight, you turn off the light without fear. You don't run from the dark. You rest in it. You don't fill the space. You inhabit it. And you remember Epictetus' words. It is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about them. You used to judge loneliness as failure. Now you see it as formation. The space where your roots deepen, where you strip away the superficial, where you learn the difference between solitude and scarcity. And that kind of knowledge, it doesn't glitter, but it glows. So you sit quietly now, letting the glow spread, letting the silence say what words cannot. And as you breathe slow and even, you ask yourself, what kind of life am I building now that I am no longer afraid of being alone? The answer may take time, but it will come, in whispers, in choices, in the quiet courage of showing up for yourself again and again. There are moments now when the loneliness returns, but it wears a different face. It doesn't come as panic. It doesn't feel like drowning. It feels softer, like a low tide, not a crashing wave. And in those moments, you don't resist it. You sit beside it like an old companion, one who once brought chaos but now brings insight. Because here's the strange gift of having walked with loneliness for a while. You begin to notice the loneliness in others. You see it behind smiles, behind routines, behind the polished surfaces of curated lives. You hear it in the pause between sentences. You feel it in the way someone clings a little too tightly to distraction or praise or control. And you don't judge them. You understand them because you've been there. And you realize now how rare it is for someone to sit with another's loneliness without trying to fix it. To say, I'm here. Not to rescue, not to analyze, just to be beside them. This is the empathy that Stoicism leads to, not soft sentimentality, but grounded, earned compassion. Because once you've held space for your own sorrow, you become capable of holding space for others. Without entangling, without enabling, just with presence. The Stoics were not cold. They were clear. They understood that true strength lies not in invulnerability, but in the willingness to feel fully without being destroyed by feeling. You think of someone you used to rely on. Someone who, maybe, relied on you too much in return. And now, with space between you, you can see what it was. Two people trying to fill the same emptiness with each other. You don't blame them, you don't blame yourself. You simply see it, clearly. And with that clarity, forgiveness arises. Not because what happened didn't matter, but because your peace matters more. And with that peace, a question rises. What if you are not meant to be filled, but to be whole? That thought lands softly. You look around your room. Simple, quiet. Yours. There are no grand declarations here. No fireworks of transformation, just small shifts. Breaths that feel less rushed. Silences that no longer sting. Self-talk that is no longer cruel. And all of it, all of this subtle reweaving of your inner life, it came not in the presence of others, but in their absence. In the stillness. In the empty space that once scared you. And you begin to trust that maybe the parts of you shaped by solitude are the strongest parts of all. Not because they are untouched, but because they've been touched by pain and survived. Transformed. Refined. So now, as the evening deepens and the light softens around you, you return to your breath not to escape, but to return. You remember something from Seneca. Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving. And maybe for now that association includes you. You improving you, you tending to you, you showing up day by quiet day. Because you are no longer waiting for someone to save you from solitude. You've made solitude sacred. And as you sit here in this quiet temple of your own making, you ask, what kind of love will you be capable of now that you no longer fear your own company? You're walking now, no destination, no rush. The streets are quiet. The sky above carries the last traces of twilight, that deep blue just before full darkness. A few windows glow warm in the distance, lives unfolding behind them. And you are content simply to move. You don't feel empty anymore. Not because someone filled you, but because you stopped pouring yourself into things that couldn't hold you. There's something deeply stoic in that. Learning to conserve your energy, your affection, your attention, not out of fear, but out of respect. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not every moment calls for your full investment. You've learned this not in theory, but in practice. Loneliness was once the teacher you feared, but now it's the teacher you bow to, because it has taught you to see clearly, quietly, what matters. You notice the way a tree leans toward the last light. The way the breeze lifts the corner of an old poster. The way your feet carry you without urgency, without proving. This is not the absence of longing. It's the maturing of it. You no longer long to be seen, you long to see life as it is, to meet the moment not with demand but with dignity. And in that shift you are free. You recall Epictetus again. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. You used to try to control connection, to manage how others saw you, to chase closeness like it was a prize to win. Now you simply show up, whole, honest, unmasked. And whoever meets you there, they are welcome. But you are no longer negotiating your self-worth for the company of others. This is the quiet confidence that arises from loneliness, the kind that no one sees coming. It doesn't shout. It doesn't dominate. It simply stands like a tree rooted deep beneath the earth, unmoved by weather. You feel it now in your spine, in the way your shoulders no longer slump under invisible weights, in the way your breath has settled into something rhythmic, patient, unforced. And you wonder, what does it mean to belong if not first to yourself? This is the paradox you live now. Loneliness taught you to belong to yourself. And in doing so, it prepared you quietly, invisibly, to belong to the world in a truer way. You are no longer seeking to be absorbed by others. You are seeking resonance, not fusion but harmony, not dependency but interdependence. And from that place, you begin to offer yourself not as someone who needs saving, but as someone who listens, who sees, who walks beside. You don't need others to complete you anymore. You need only to meet them as you are and allow them to be who they are. This, too, is a gift from solitude. So you continue walking, letting the night deepen around you, letting the earth spin beneath your steps, asking softly, "Who am I becoming, now that I've stopped running from myself?" There's a peace that only comes after the storm, and you've earned it. Not the loud kind, not triumph with banners and trumpets, but the quiet sort. The peace that whispers instead of announces. That lives in the space between your thoughts, in the way your body rests without tension, in the way you no longer beg time to hurry or slow. It lives in the moment you wake and don't feel panic, in the moment you sit and don't reach for distraction, in the moment you feel alone and simply let it be. This is not numbness. This is not apathy. This is presence. And presence, you've found, is where life actually begins. The Stoics were never about suppressing emotion. They were about directing it, honoring it, but not being ruled by it. They knew that the most dangerous form of loneliness isn't the kind where no one is around. It's the kind where you're surrounded but still not seen, still not known, still not connected even to yourself. And so they asked, what is up to you? Not who stays, not who understands, not how others love you, but how you respond, how you stand, how you keep your integrity intact, even when the world forgets to affirm you. You live this now in small ways. You no longer chase replies. You speak your truth and release it. You no longer bend to please. You live in alignment, not approval. You no longer perform peace. You practice it breath by breath. And in all this, a soft strength emerges. Not the strength of armor, but the strength of a tree rooted deep in silence. You remember Marcus Aurelius. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions, than your own soul. You used to think of your soul as something to seek. Now you know it's something you come home to, every night, every breath, every time you choose presence over panic, stillness over speed, self-respect over reaction. And here's the truth you never expected. Loneliness gave you this. Not despite its ache, but through it. Because the ache forced you inward. And inward you found something you hadn't seen in years, yourself. Not the version shaped by need, not the version edited for acceptance, but the quiet, steady presence beneath it all. And once you saw that, you could never unsee it. You could never go back to outsourcing your belonging. You could never unlearn the sacredness of your own company. Tonight, as you sit once more in the hush of your room, you breathe in this quiet. Not as a placeholder, not as waiting, but as presence. Complete. And a final question rises, not demanding, just drifting through the silence like a feather. What kind of life are you now capable of living, now that you've made peace with solitude? You won't answer with words. You'll answer with how you rise tomorrow, with how you walk, with how you hold space for others and for yourself, and with how, quietly, you've become someone you trust to walk the path, even when no one else can see it. The night is quiet now, fully settled. No lingering echoes, no last traces of daylight, just you, the hush, and the rhythm of your own breath. You're not seeking anymore. You're not resisting. You're simply here. And in this final chapter of the journey, a deep truth settles in your bones. Loneliness was never your enemy. It was your initiation. It stripped away your illusions, softened your defenses, and introduced you gently, sometimes painfully, to the self you had long abandoned. It taught you that peace isn't found in people, it's found in presence. That wholeness isn't given, it's uncovered. That freedom isn't granted, it's chosen every time you decide to remain true to yourself, even in silence. Tonight you lie down with a heart that no longer pleads. You lie down not out of exhaustion but out of readiness, ready to rest, ready to trust, ready to stop performing healing and simply live from it. You think now of the Stoics, of Marcus in his tent, writing by lantern light after war councils and sleepless nights, reminding himself, and now us. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This isn't just a quote anymore. It's become your lived truth. You've learned to watch your thoughts like clouds passing, shifting, dissolving. You've learned that not every inner voice deserves your attention. You've learned that silence is not emptiness, it's spaciousness. And in that space, you've grown. You've softened in the right places, hardened where needed, become not bitter but discerning, more curious than controlling, more anchored than reactive. And in this new way of being, something beautiful happens. The world begins to meet you differently, not because it changed, but because you did. You walk with a different rhythm now, speak with a different tone. You show up not from fear of being forgotten, but from the fullness of being found, by yourself. And that kind of presence, it ripples. It creates safety for others. It allows depth. It inspires stillness, not the frozen kind, but the fertile kind, where things grow slow and real. So tonight, you dim the lights and you return to your body. You feel the weight of the blanket, the softness of the air, the hum of life